It was supposed to be the happiest day of Sarah's life until her German Shepherd, Max, did the unthinkable. In front of 200 wedding guests, he lunged at the groom's best man with vicious fury. The screaming bride begged him to stop, but Max wouldn't let go. Everyone thought the dog had lost his mind until police discovered what the best man was hiding in his jacket. The truth will leave you speechless. Stay until the end because what this loyal dog prevented will change how you see courage forever. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of the bridal suite at St. Catherine's Church, casting golden patterns across the hardwood floor. Sarah Mitchell stood before an ornate mirror, her hands trembling slightly as she fastened the delicate pearl earrings her grandmother had worn on her own wedding day 60 years ago. "You look absolutely radiant," whispered her maid of honor, Emma, adjusting the flowing train of Sarah's ivory dress. The silk shimmered in the morning light, every detail perfect after months of careful planning. But Sarah's eyes weren't on her reflection. They were on the large German Shepherd lying peacefully near the window, his golden brown fur catching the sunlight as he watched her every movement with devoted amber eyes. "Max," she said softly, and immediately the dog's ears perked up. His tail gave a gentle thump against the floor, but he didn't move from his position. He'd been trained since puppyhood to read her moods, to sense her needs before she even knew them herself. Max had been Sarah's constant companion for 6 years, ever since she'd found him as a scared, injured puppy abandoned in an alley behind her veterinary clinic. She was just finishing her residency then, working 18-hour days and coming home to an empty apartment. But Max had changed everything. "I can't believe you're bringing him to the ceremony," Emma laughed, though her voice carried warmth. "Most brides worry about their makeup or their dress. You're worried about your dog." Sarah smiled, kneeling carefully in her gown to stroke Max's head. "He's family, Em. He's been with me through everything, med school stress, Dad's cancer, that awful breakup with David. I can't imagine the most important day of my life without him there." Max pressed his muzzle gently against her palm, his eyes soft with understanding. There was something almost human in the way he looked at her, as if he could sense the magnitude of this day, the joy mixed with nervous energy that radiated from his beloved human. Outside, guests were beginning to arrive. The parking lot filled with cars as friends and family made their way into the historic church. The morning was perfect, clear skies, gentle breeze, the kind of autumn day that seemed designed for new beginnings. In the groom's preparation room down the hall, a very different scene was unfolding. Michael Barrett adjusted his tie for the 5th time, his hands steady despite the nervous energy that filled the room. As a detective with the city police force, he was used to high-pressure situations, but standing at the altar in front of everyone he loved felt more terrifying than any crime scene. "Relax, Mike," laughed his brother Tom, straightening his own tie. "It's just a wedding, not a hostage negotiation." Michael grinned. "Says the guy who threw up twice before his own ceremony." But his smile faded slightly as his eyes moved to the third man in the room, his best man, Jake Thornton. Jake stood by the window, seemingly calm, but there was something in his posture that Michael's trained eye found unsettling. Jake was a relatively new friend, someone Michael had met through the police academy's continuing education program 6 months ago. He'd been charming, funny, eager to help with wedding planning. When Michael's original best man had to cancel due to a family emergency, Jake had stepped in without hesitation. "Everything all right, Jake?" Michael asked, noticing the way his friend's eyes kept darting toward the door. Jake turned with a bright smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Perfect, man. Just thinking about how lucky you are. Sarah's an incredible woman." There was something in the way Jake said her name that made Michael pause. It was too familiar, too intimate. But before he could analyze the feeling, the wedding coordinator knocked on the door. "Gentlemen, 5 minutes until we begin." Michael took a deep breath, pushing aside the nagging feeling in his gut. This was his wedding day. Nothing was going to go wrong. But in the corner of the room, Jake's hand unconsciously moved to his jacket pocket, where something small and hard pressed against the fabric. His smile never wavered, but his fingers traced the outline of the object hidden beneath the expensive wool. The church filled with soft music as guests settled into the polished wooden pews. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, painting the altar in jeweled colors of blue, red, and gold. White roses and baby's breath decorated every surface, filling the air with their sweet fragrance. Michael stood at the altar with Jake beside him, both men impeccable in their black tuxedos. The groomsmen lined up with practiced precision, but Michael found his eyes searching the crowd. Something still felt off about Jake's behavior, though he couldn't put his finger on what. The music swelled, and every head turned toward the back of the church as the bridal procession began. Emma walked down the aisle first, radiant in her soft blue dress, followed by Sarah's cousins and college friends. And then came Sarah, her arm linked through her father's, looking like something from a fairy tale. Her dress flowed behind her like liquid silk, her dark hair crowned with tiny flowers, her smile bright enough to light up the entire church. But what caught everyone's attention wasn't just the bride's beauty, it was the magnificent German shepherd walking in perfect formation beside her, his steps matching hers with military precision. Max wore a special collar made of white leather with tiny pearls, his fur brushed to perfection. He walked with quiet dignity, his eyes scanning the crowd with protective awareness but showing no signs of aggression or anxiety. Murmurs of surprise and delight rippled through the congregation. Many of the guests had heard about Sarah's beloved dog, but seeing him participate in the ceremony was something entirely different. "He's beautiful," someone whispered. "Look how well-behaved he is," another guest marveled. But as the bridal party reached the front of the church, Max's demeanor suddenly changed. His ears pricked forward, his nostrils flared, and his entire body went rigid. His gaze locked onto Jake with laser-like intensity. A low, almost inaudible growl rumbled from deep in his chest. Sarah felt the tension in Max's body through the leash and glanced down at him with concern. In 6 years, she had never seen him react to anyone with such focused intensity. His training as both her companion and as a former military working dog, he'd been retired from service due to a minor injury, had taught him perfect control in all situations. "Easy, boy," she whispered softly, but Max's attention remained fixed on Jake. The officiating pastor, Reverend Williams, began the ceremony with warm words about love and commitment, but Sarah found herself distracted by Max's unusual behavior. The dog had positioned himself slightly in front of her, his body language protective and alert. Jake, for his part, seemed oblivious to the dog's attention. He stood with a pleasant smile, occasionally nodding at appropriate moments in the ceremony. But there was something mechanical about his responses, as if he was following a script while his mind was elsewhere. Michael noticed the exchange between his bride and her dog, and the nagging feeling in his stomach grew stronger. Max was known for his gentle nature and perfect manners. For him to show any sign of distress during such an important moment was completely out of character. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Williams continued, his voice carrying clearly through the church, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell and Michael James Barrett in holy matrimony." As the ceremony progressed, Max's agitation increased. His breathing became more rapid, and the low growl continued, barely audible but constant. Sarah tried to calm him with gentle touches, but nothing seemed to work. In the third row, Sarah's mother leaned toward her husband. "What's wrong with Max?" she whispered. "I've never seen him act like this." Dr. Mitchell, a veterinarian like his daughter, studied the dog's body language with professional interest. "He's reacting to something specific," he murmured. "Look at his focus. That's not generalized anxiety, that's a targeted response." Meanwhile, Jake's hand moved again to his jacket pocket. This time, Michael caught the movement out of the corner of his eye. It was a nervous gesture, repetitive, as if Jake was checking to make sure something was still there. The feeling in Michael's gut intensified. His detective instincts, honed by years on the force, were screaming that something was wrong. But what could possibly be threatening at his own wedding, surrounded by family and friends? If anyone has any reason why these two should not be wed, speak now or forever hold your peace, Reverend Williams intoned, following the traditional words of the ceremony. The church fell silent, as it always did during this moment. But instead of the peaceful quiet that should have followed, Max's growls suddenly erupted into a thunderous bark that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. Before anyone could react, the German Shepherd lunged forward with explosive force, breaking free from Sarah's grip on his leash. His powerful body sailed through the air, teeth bared, eyes blazing with protective fury. Jake had no time to defend himself. Max's full weight slammed into his chest, sending both of them crashing to the marble floor in a tangle of black fabric and golden fur. The impact echoed through the church like a gunshot. Screams erupted from the congregation. Guests leaped to their feet, some rushing toward the exits, others pushing forward to help. Sarah's bouquet flew from her hands as she reached desperately for her dog. "Max, no. Stop," she cried, her voice breaking with horror and confusion. But Max wasn't listening. His jaws had locked onto Jake's jacket sleeve, and he was shaking his head violently, trying to tear something away from the man's body. His training had taken over completely. This wasn't a pet having a meltdown, this was a working dog neutralizing a threat. Michael rushed forward, his law enforcement training kicking in. "Everyone stay back," he shouted, trying to establish control over the chaos. But even as he moved to help Jake, something stopped him. Jake wasn't fighting back the way an innocent victim would. Instead of trying to get away from the dog, he was desperately trying to protect something against his chest, his arms wrapped around his jacket as if guarding a precious secret. "Get this animal off me!" Jake screamed, but there was something in his voice, not just fear, but panic. The panic of someone whose carefully laid plans were falling apart. Max continued his assault, his powerful jaws working methodically to tear away Jake's jacket. Fabric ripped with sharp sounds that cut through the screaming and confusion. And then, with a final violent shake of his head, Max succeeded in his mission. Something small and metallic flew from Jake's torn jacket and skittered across the marble floor with a sound that made everyone in the church freeze. It was a device. Electronic. Unfamiliar to most, but terrifyingly familiar to Michael's trained eye. "Everyone down!" Michael shouted, his voice carrying the absolute authority of a police officer. Now. The object that Max had torn from Jake's jacket lay gleaming under the church's chandelier light. To most of the wedding guests, it looked like harmless electronics, maybe a phone or a recording device. But Michael's stomach dropped as he recognized exactly what it was. A detonator. "Dear God," he breathed, his mind racing through the implications. "Sarah, get everyone out. Now." But before anyone could move, Jake's facade finally cracked completely. The charming smile was gone, replaced by cold fury as he struggled to his feet, his torn jacket hanging in tatters. "You stupid animal," he snarled at Max, who stood between him and the detonator, lips curled back in a protective stance. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" The transformation was chilling. Gone was the friendly, helpful best man who had been part of their wedding planning for months. In his place stood a stranger whose eyes burned with an intensity that made several guests step backward. Michael's training kicked into high gear. "Jake, don't move. Don't even think about reaching for that device." "Device?" Sarah gasped, her mind struggling to process what was happening. "Michael, what's going on?" "Ma'am, I need you to evacuate the church," Michael said, never taking his eyes off Jake. "Use the side exits. Move quickly but don't panic." But Jake laughed, a sound devoid of any warmth. Too late for that, Detective Barrett. You really thought this was about friendship? About wanting to celebrate your special day? The words hit Michael like physical blows. What are you talking about? This was never about you, Mike. This was about her. Jake's gaze moved to Sarah with an obsession that made her blood run cold. Beautiful, brilliant Dr. Sarah Mitchell. Do you know how long I've been watching her? Planning for her. Sarah's face went white. I don't understand. I've never met you before. Michael introduced us. Oh, but I've met you, Jake continued, his voice taking on a disturbing intimacy. I've been to your veterinary clinic dozens of times. I sat in that waiting room, pretending to have sick pets, just to watch you work. You never noticed me, of course. You never noticed anyone who wasn't good enough for your perfect world. The pieces began falling into place for Michael. The way Jake had seemed to know so much about Sarah's preferences, her schedule, her favorite places. It hadn't been friendship, it had been stalking. When I heard you were getting married, Jake continued, I knew I had to act. If I couldn't have you, Sarah, then no one could. A tragic wedding day bombing. So sad. So unexpected. But at least we'd be together in death. Reverend Williams had been quietly moving toward the church's emergency phone, but Jake caught the movement. Don't even think about it, Reverend. One wrong move and I'll set off the backup detonator. He reached into his other pocket, revealing a second device. You see, I planned for contingencies. I'm not the amateur you take me for. But what Jake hadn't planned for was Max. As Jake spoke, revealing the depth of his obsession and the horror of his plan, Max remained perfectly still, his body coiled like a spring. The German Shepherd's military training had taught him to read human behavior, to identify threats, to act with precision when violence was necessary. And every instinct in his battle-tested body was screaming that this man was a deadly threat to his beloved Sarah. You want to know the beautiful part of my plan? Jake continued, his voice gaining a manic edge. I volunteered to be your best man so I'd have access to everything. I know this church's layout, I know the guest list, I know exactly how much explosive I needed to bring the whole building down. Sarah's knees threatened to give out. You're insane. I'm devoted, Jake corrected. Something you'd understand if you weren't so focused on playing house with this cop. Michael was calculating angles, distances, possibilities. As a detective, he'd been in hostage situations before, but never one where his bride was the target and his German Shepherd was the only thing standing between a madman and mass murder. Jake, listen to me, Michael said, using his crisis negotiation training. You don't want to hurt innocent people. This is between you and me. No. Jake's voice rose to a near shout. This is about Sarah. It was always about Sarah. She's supposed to be with someone who appreciates her, someone who understands her value. And you think killing her is showing appreciation? Sarah found her voice, though it trembled with terror and disbelief. Death is better than watching you waste your life with him, Jake replied, his logic twisted beyond recognition. At least this way, you'll be remembered as perfect. Frozen in this moment of beauty. That's when Max moved. The German Shepherd's attack was swift, precise, and devastating. He launched himself not at Jake's body, but at his hand, specifically, the hand holding the backup detonator. Jake screamed as 80 pounds of muscle and fury slammed into him, sending the device flying across the church floor. But Max wasn't finished. His training had taught him to neutralize threats completely, and he pressed his advantage with professional ruthlessness. This time, when Max's jaws closed around Jake's arm, it wasn't to tear fabric. It was to immobilize a dangerous suspect. Max, hold. Michael shouted, using the command that every military working dog knew. Max immediately responded, maintaining his grip but stopping all movement. Jake writhed in agony, but couldn't escape the dog's controlled bite. "Get him off. Get him off me." Michael quickly secured both detonators, his hands shaking as he realized how close they had all come to unthinkable tragedy. "Sarah, call 911. Tell them we need bomb squad and paramedics. Is anyone hurt?" Sarah called out to the congregation, her medical training taking over even as her world spun out of control. Within minutes, the church was swarming with emergency responders. The bomb squad carefully removed Jake from Max's grip and immediately began searching him for additional devices. What they found made even hardened professionals shake their heads in disbelief. "He's got enough explosive material to level half the block," reported Sergeant Martinez, the bomb squad leader. This wasn't meant to be a simple murder, this was planned as a massacre. Jake was loaded into an ambulance under heavy police guard, his arm bandaged but his wounds superficial. Max's training had been perfect, he had immobilized the threat without causing permanent damage. As the chaos slowly organized itself into a crime scene investigation, Sarah sat in a church pew with Max pressed against her side, both of them trembling from adrenaline and shock. "I can't believe this is real," she whispered to Michael, who had his arm around her shoulders. 6 months. He's been planning this for 6 months. Detective Captain Rodriguez, Michael's superior, approached with a grim expression. "Barrett, we're going to need full statements from everyone involved. What we're looking at here is attempted mass murder, stalking, conspiracy to commit terrorism. This is going to be a major case." "What about Max?" Sarah asked, her voice thick with emotion. "He saved everyone. He saved our lives." Captain Rodriguez looked down at the German Shepherd, who sat calmly beside Sarah despite the chaos around them. "Ma'am, that dog is a hero. Without him, we'd be looking at one of the worst tragedies this city has ever seen." FBI agents arrived within the hour, having been called in due to the terrorism aspects of the case. Agent Williams, a behavioral specialist, spent considerable time studying the scene and interviewing witnesses. "In 20 years of law enforcement," she told Michael and Sarah, "I've never seen a civilian dog demonstrate such precise threat assessment and response. Your Max didn't just attack randomly, he identified a specific threat and neutralized it with surgical precision." "He's former military," Sarah explained, her hand resting protectively on Max's head. "He served 2 tours overseas before being retired due to a minor injury. But I never imagined." "Military working dogs never really retire," Agent Williams said with respect. "They just changed their mission. Today, his mission was protecting you, and he executed it flawlessly." Over the following days, as investigators dug deeper into Jake Thornton's background, the full scope of his obsession became terrifyingly clear. His apartment was a shrine to Sarah, photos taken without her knowledge, detailed schedules of her daily routines, floor plans of her clinic and home. "He's been stalking her for over 2 years, Detective Lisa Chung reported to Michael and Sarah during a follow-up briefing. "We found evidence that he deliberately sought out the police training program specifically to get close to you, Michael. But how did he know so much about our relationship?" Sarah asked. "Our wedding plans, our personal details. He hacked your social media, your email accounts, even your veterinary clinic's computer system," Detective Chung continued. "He knew everything, your guest list, your ceremony timeline, even the fact that Max would be part of the wedding." Michael shook his head in disgust. "And I never suspected anything. He seemed so helpful, so interested in being part of our special day. That's what made him dangerous," Agent Williams added. "Thornton is highly intelligent and methodical. This wasn't a crime of passion, this was a carefully planned operation designed to look like a tragic accident until the last possible moment." "What's going to happen to him?" Sarah asked. "He's facing federal terrorism charges in addition to stalking and attempted murder," Detective Chung replied. "With the evidence we've gathered, he's looking at life in prison without possibility of parole." Sarah felt a mix of relief and lingering fear. And there's no chance he can hurt anyone else. None, Agent Williams assured her. He's being held in maximum security federal custody. This nightmare is over. But the trauma wasn't over for Sarah and Michael. They'd been forced to cancel their honeymoon while dealing with police interviews, court proceedings, and the psychological impact of learning that their perfect day had nearly been their last. 3 weeks after what the media had dubbed the wedding day miracle, Sarah and Michael sat in the office of Dr. Elizabeth Harper, a trauma counselor who specialized in helping victims of stalking and violence. It's completely normal to feel unsafe, to question your judgment, to wonder if you missed warning signs, Dr. Harper explained gently. What you experienced was one of the most violating crimes possible. Someone invaded your most intimate moments with the intent to destroy them. I keep thinking about all the times he was around us, Sarah said, her voice hollow. All the wedding planning meetings, the dinners, the conversations. He was gathering intelligence the entire time. Michael reached over to take her hand. We couldn't have known. He was a trained professional who deliberately deceived us. But Max knew, Sarah said, looking down at the German Shepherd lying beside her chair. From the very beginning, Max knew something was wrong. Dr. Harper leaned forward with interest. Tell me about that. When did you first notice Max's reaction? The moment Jake walked into the church that morning, Sarah replied. Max has never shown aggression toward anyone, but he immediately focused on Jake with an intensity I'd never seen before. Dogs, especially trained working dogs, can detect things humans miss, Dr. Harper explained. Changes in scent, subtle behavioral cues, even chemical changes in a person's body when they're planning violence. Max's training and his bond with you created the perfect early warning system. The investigators said Max's response was textbook perfect, Michael added with pride. He identified the threat, alerted to danger, and when necessary, neutralized the attacker with minimal force. He saved everyone in that church, Sarah whispered, her eyes filling with tears. 200 people could have died if not for Max. Dr. Harper smiled. And that's something to celebrate, not just survive. You have a living hero sleeping at your feet, and he chose to protect not just you, but everyone you love. 2 months later, the city held a special ceremony in Max's honor. The event took place in the same church where he had prevented the tragedy, now redecorated for celebration rather than investigation. Mayor Thompson stood at the podium where Reverend Williams had been conducting the wedding ceremony. We gather today not to witness a wedding, but to honor a hero whose actions prevented one of the most heinous crimes in our city's history. The crowd included many of the same guests who had attended the wedding, along with police officers, FBI agents, and members of the press. Sarah and Michael sat in the front row with Max beside them, the German Shepherd wearing a special ceremonial collar made of gold leather. Max, a retired military working dog, used his training and his remarkable bond with his family to identify and neutralize a terrorist threat, the mayor continued. His actions saved the lives of over 200 innocent people. Captain Rodriguez stepped forward with a special commendation. On behalf of the police department, I present Max with the Civilian Medal of Valor, the highest honor we can bestow on a non-human hero. The crowd erupted in applause as Sarah helped place the medal around Max's neck. The German Shepherd sat perfectly still, as if he understood the solemnity of the moment, though his tail gave a few gentle wags at the sound of applause. But Max's heroism goes beyond just stopping a crime, Agent Williams spoke next. He represents the incredible bond between humans and animals, the way love and loyalty can overcome even the most carefully planned evil. Sarah was asked to speak on behalf of Max, and she approached the podium with tears in her eyes. 6 years ago, I found a scared, injured puppy in an alley behind my clinic, she began. I brought him home thinking I was rescuing him. But on what should have been the happiest day of my life, Max proved that he was the one rescuing me. People ask me how I knew to trust his instincts, how I trained him to be such a perfect protector. The truth is, I didn't train him to be a hero. He already was one. I just gave him a family worth protecting. 6 months after the ceremony that was interrupted by violence, Sarah and Michael finally had their wedding. This time, it was a small, intimate affair in Sarah's parents' backyard, with only their closest family and friends in attendance. Max walked Sarah down the aisle again, but this time he wore his Medal of Valor alongside his white leather collar. His steps were calm and confident, his eyes alert but peaceful. He had learned that danger could hide anywhere, but he had also learned that love was stronger than fear. "Do you take this woman to be your wife?" asked Reverend Williams, who had insisted on officiating despite the trauma of that first ceremony. "I do," Michael said, his voice strong and certain. "Do you take this man to be your husband?" "I do," Sarah replied, her eyes shining with joy. "Then by the power vested in me, and with the blessing of the best four-legged bodyguard in the city, I pronounce you husband and wife." As Michael and Sarah kissed, Max gave a single, satisfied bark, not a warning this time, but a celebration. The reception was held under twinkling lights strung between oak trees, with a special table set up for Max complete with a gourmet dog dinner and a cake made specifically for him by Sarah's mother. To Max, toasted Michael's brother Tom, raising his glass. "Who proved that sometimes the best man really is a dog." The crowd laughed and raised their glasses as Max tilted his head at the attention, his tail wagging slowly. Later that evening, as guests danced under the stars, Sarah sat on the porch steps with Max beside her, both of them watching the celebration. "You know what the strangest part is?" she said to Michael as he joined them. "I'm actually grateful it happened." Michael looked at her in surprise. "Grateful? Not for the danger, or the fear, or what could have happened," Sarah clarified. "But grateful that I got to see who Max really is. For 6 years, I thought I was taking care of him. But he was taking care of me all along." Max rested his head on Sarah's lap, his eyes half closed in contentment. Around them, their loved ones celebrated under a sky full of stars, safe and happy because one loyal heart had refused to let evil win. "Heroes come in all shapes and sizes," Sarah murmured, stroking Max's fur. "Sometimes they wear uniforms, sometimes they carry badges. And sometimes, they walk on 4 legs and love you enough to fight the whole world to keep you safe." A year later, Sarah and Michael's story had inspired changes that reached far beyond their own lives. Max had become the poster dog for a new program training retired military working dogs as civilian protection animals for stalking victims and domestic violence survivors. Sarah had left her private practice to work full-time with the program, using her veterinary expertise to ensure the dog's health and her personal experience to understand the unique bond between protector and protected. "People think service dogs are just for physical disabilities," Sarah explained to a group of trainees and their new canine partners. "But Max taught me that sometimes the greatest disability is fear, and the greatest healing comes from knowing someone will always have your back." Michael had been promoted to detective captain and now oversaw a special unit focused on stalking and domestic terrorism cases. His experience with Jake Thornton had taught him to recognize the subtle signs of obsession and planning that others might miss. But perhaps the most important legacy was the one that lived quietly in the hearts of everyone who had been in that church. 200 people who went home that night knowing they were alive because one dog loved his family enough to risk everything for them. Max, now 8 years old with a few more gray hairs around his muzzle, continued his daily routine of protecting Sarah. But he also had new responsibilities. He served as an ambassador for his program, showing other dogs and their humans what was possible when love and training combined with unshakable loyalty. On quiet evenings, when Sarah and Michael sat on their porch watching the sunset, Max would lie between them, his medal gleaming on his collar, his eyes peaceful but forever watchful. "Thank you, boy," Sarah would whisper, and Max would give that same gentle tail wag that had graced their wedding day, the wag of a hero who had done his job and found his purpose in protecting the people he loved. Sometimes the most savage act is actually the most loving. Sometimes courage wears a collar instead of a cape. And sometimes, the greatest love story isn't between two people, it's between a human and the four-legged guardian angel who refuses to let anything harm their family. If this story moved you, remember that there are heroes all around us. Some wear uniforms, some wear badges, and some wear collars. Share Max's story to honor all the loyal protectors who keep us safe, and never underestimate the power of a heart that loves without limits. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your own stories of loyal companions in the comments below. Because every hero deserves to be remembered, and every act of courage deserves to be celebrated.